First of all, I wanted to do a review of the television series Legion, which I'd just been watching, and I saw the second episode just yesterday. And I think that's what I'm going to do from now on. Like, if I get a new series, I'm going to watch the first two episodes, then review it, particularly if it's something I don't think a lot of people are going to watch. Legion it's on FX, or FXX, I think it's now called. And I keep running into people who I think would love it, but who've never seen it, and I get the impression aren't going to see it. And that's a shame, because it's a really cool show, and briefly, here's why. In the X-Men comics, David Haller is the son of Charles Xavier, and Haller is one of the most powerful mutants in existence. In continuity, if I recall, and I believe I actually have the comics somewhere upstairs, I haven't read it in easily a decade, something happens where there's an attack or something at an airport, probably a terrorist attack, probably the comics writers aping the news from that period. You know, there were terrorist attacks on airports and airplanes at the time. And it goes wrong and a whole bunch of people die. But the difference being in the fictional setting of Marvel Comics, particularly the X-Men comics, David Haller is there, and I believe there's like a psychic backlash, some psychic stuff happens. And a whole bunch of people die, more than would have otherwise, but as people die, their minds are kind of imprinted on David Haller's mind. And he ends up with all of these people in his head as a child. And just the nature of his power and this unusual event causes him to have, all of these, once again, something from that period, from the 80s, I believe, the multiple personality disorder. And only the ultimate one. He has hundreds of personalities in his head. These people, some of whom are real people, who have actual memories, or at least they're based on an actual person who died while David was there. And because of that, each one of these characters, these people in his head, ends up having a different power. Like, one of them is a pyrokinetic, one of them's telekinetic, some are psychic, some can project illusions, and so on and so forth. And in the comics, at one point they confront him, and one of the characters says, does the stupid quote from the Bible, we are many, call us Legion. And that's where the character came from. In the comics, Legion is not so much a character, because like I said, it contains hundreds of characters. The character is hundreds of characters. It's more like a force of nature or a plot device. Legion is doing some fucked up thing now, we have to stop him, begin story. The point I'm getting to in this brief summary is that it's not a very well-established character. It's not a popular character, and anyone who's not familiar with the comics has probably never heard of this character. But such that apparently they just released the rights to this for this TV series, and they didn't care. Marvel didn't want the rights to this character. I strongly expect they had no intention of ever including him in the movies or any of their... It doesn't... Many people dying, multiple personality disorders, schizophrenia, this doesn't really fit in something you put in a kid's program. He's much too complicated and too powerful to not be the main villain in a movie or something like that, so he doesn't fit anywhere. So they just released him, and that's where this starts to get interesting. But let's get into that real quick. So, here's the thing. In the TV series, that's loosely, very, very loosely based on that crap I just described, David Haller is a schizophrenic. He's diagnosed as schizophrenic. He's heard voices his entire life, and strange things happen around him. And as far as I can tell so far, they have diverged a great deal from every single thing I've just described. I don't know how this works, but I don't think the TV show has the rights to any of the X-Men, aside from Legion himself. I don't think we're going to see any of the X-Men. I don't think we'll see any mention of Charles Xavier. Or anything. And episode 2 so far, we have a group of anti-mutant people the likes of which I don't think I've ever seen described in any comic book that I'm aware of, although I stopped reading X-Men comics early aughts, somewhere around there, like late 90s, early aughts, so it's been like over a decade and a half. But I'm not familiar with them. They don't look like anything from the comics at all. And at this point, there's a group of mutants, although once again, neither of these very clearly fits into an X-Men comic. They're very different than that. And that's kind of a cool thing, too, story-wise. They're significantly different. I have no expectations. Like, I can't say I've read the comics, so obviously know this. The first episode, I thought I have this shit figured out. I know what's going to go, how this is going to go down, what's going to happen, and so on. And now episode 2, I throw all that out. I have no idea what's going on or where this is going. But I'm very interested to see where it's going. Man, we're introduced to this series where the visuals are amazing. From what I understand, Noah Hawley, I believe that's his name, Noah Hawley, actually directed the first episode. He's the showrunner, did some of the writing from what I understand, and he's done a fantastic job. And whoever the hell is doing the directing and the rest of this, the visuals are amazing. Cinematography. Dana Gonzalez. I wanted to look that up. Because visually this thing's a treat. It's crazy. If you're into frenetically paced psychedelic kookiness, this is your thing. This is awesome. It has a very weird tone and pace to it. Things make sense, but they're clearly out of order. Like we're introduced to this one scene where he's in the MRI. You saw this from the commercials, where he's in the MRI. You have a usually large amygdala, and he's like, "Thanks." We're not introduced. There's no introduction to that scene. We just start there, and eventually you figure out where it fits out, because everything is in flashbacks. Literal flashbacks in that we're remembering stuff from David's past or being shown things that happened in the past, but also there's people deliberately delving into David's mind, showing him the past and so on. So there's flashbacks that fit in mechanically through the story itself. So far I'm loving it a lot. I want to get that out. I love the fuck out of this thing. I'm glad I waited till the second episode to do a review of it, though, because I did a review of Son of Zorn, for example, and not to pick on that show, but that's a good example. The first episode had a lot of energy. It was a cool concept, but it's lost me like halfway through the second episode. And I've tried to watch bits and pieces of it. It's just not. It's not compelling enough to keep you for a full series. Like, it was a good idea for a one-off, like a Saturday Night Live skit or something like that. But a whole show, ongoing show, like a season of something, no, it doesn't. It's not working. Legion has enough of a story where we need to have shit explained to us in the past. Like, we need to find out what's happened so far, and then there's the stuff that's happening now, and then what are the results of that? Where do we go from here? All three of these are interesting and are going to take a lot of explanation. Consequently, we have the impetus for an entire show. So, okay, so if I were to try to convince someone to see this, and that's the point of this video, is to, as sort of a review, but sort of, if you haven't seen this show, or you have no intention of seeing the show, I'm hoping at the course of this it'll at least pique your interest enough to give it a shot. The one thing I would say is, this reminds me of Lost. Not that it's like the show Lost, but it has that sort of, it's an interesting story. It's a complicated enough story, and it's a character-driven story that that presents the audience with a lot of questions. And the reason you watch the show is, I want these questions answered. Like, this is what is going on, and then you learn a little more, and it's like, okay, that answered my question, but now I have more questions. It's like that. It's like Lost, and if it can keep up the Lost thing without getting stupid shitty, redundant, or obtuse. That was the problem. Let's be fair. The problem with Lost is it got obtuse. It didn't make any sense. It was just making up stuff for the sake of making up stuff. It was being weird for the sake of being weird. Where this show does do that. I'm positive it's doing that. But at the same time, it has enough coherent story that has to have a resolution. I think they could do this, like a Lost that works. This show, it's just focused on David Haller, and he's an interesting enough character. And we're seeing a lot of the story from his perspective, and he is diagnosed as a schizophrenic. He is on medication. He's a very unreliable narrator, and he seems to be very aware of that. Like, occasionally there's stuff happening, and it's, once again, no spoilers, but is this something that really happened? Is this something David imagined? Because he thinks he imagined it, but he's not sure, and then people are telling him things he saw aren't real. Are they right? And it brings up the question, is it real or is it all in his head? And the answer might be both. That's a cool premise, and I want to see where the rest of the show goes. If you haven't seen the show, give it a shot. It's on FX. Okay, so the reason that this got greenlit in my mind is, okay, it's a comic book show. Right now, comic book shows, like, in my head, somewhere there's an executive going, comic book shows are popular, and they are. That's a fact. They are popular right now. It's a good time to have a comic book show. Something based even loosely on a comic book property. Some of them are diverging a great deal from the source material, whether it be a movie or a TV show, giving you a loose sort of realization of it. The Batman Begins trilogy, the Nolan trilogy, kind of is, I'd say, loosely based on Batman. More loosely, anyway. It was more like, here's Batman as realistically as we can possibly make him. Or we're willing to. And then you have as the comic book stuff, which is more like, I'd say more like the CW Arrow stuff or Flash, which is much more comic book-like, or Legends of Tomorrow in particular. Not really my fare, but that's more the comic book and the more fantastic. This diverges a lot. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea where they're going with this. And that's the fun of it. That's why this show is cool. So in short, I'm babbling at this point. Watch this show. Give the show a chance if you have the time. It's worth checking out. So far, the visuals, the music, also, I don't think I commented on that. The music has been very interesting choices. Everything has been a very interesting choice. Not little bit of weirdness for the sake of weirdness, I think, although I don't know, because we haven't seen how everything plays out, how everything's connected. But cool choices, even divorced from the rest of the series. Each episode is interesting to watch. Visually, story-wise, music, everything. And the camera work, I haven't said anything about that, and I should at least touch on. The camera work is nuts. And it's great. I mean, it's so good. It is so good. It's pure madness. Visually, this is for a TV show. Christ, for a TV show, this is fantastic. This is a movie level of weird visuals. So check the show out. Give it a shot. It's on FX. That's me.